Afternoon, it's 2 o'clock, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. To start, I'd like to just do a moment of reflection, so we reflect on today's business. Thank you. Now, is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof? And we can declare it any time throughout the meeting if it so props up. Public participation. Members of the public are encouraged to provide the committee with their comments and questions. Presentations must be prearranged with legislative services before the agenda is released. Members of the public who wish to make a deputation about a specific agenda item at the meeting must register in advance with legislative service by 4 p.m. on September 3rd, 2024 by contacting Deputy Clerk at meaford.ca or 519-538-1060 extension 1110. Presentations are limited to 10 minutes and deputations are limited to 5 minutes. Today we have no presentations or deputations on the agenda. So I'll move to number 5, which is approval of the minutes. We all have our minutes in our agendas. And I would like a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes as produced. Harley? And Kevin? Thank you. All in favor of the minutes that we have? Thank you. That is carried. Now, items for information. I'm sure we all read the 700 and some pages of the wastewater treatment plant and have it memorized. It's quite a report. Is there any comments on the report on the water treatment plant? I may ask a question then. Jessica, do you know, are we advancing to the next stage to report to the government to try to get some funding?
Through the chair. So there's probably 2 steps to that question. The first is, yes, the process is continuing to move along. So the public input into the ESR is closed. And now the next step for us is to move into design. So we are starting that process currently with a consultant to develop a terms of reference to put out for tender for the design of the plant itself. So that is continuing along its way. Funding is kind of its own separate. We had applied for a grant through the government and we were not successful. But we were invited to apply again, and we will certainly do that. So with us moving into the design phase of the project, I feel like we might have a better chance at meeting the criteria for funding. So as we weren't successful the first time, but we're hoping for success through the second phase of intake, which is based on the government having additional funding for infrastructure and housing, essentially.
Thank you. So I understand you really, until you are ready for shovels in the ground, you shouldn't apply because they're not going to hand money out unless you are ready. Question I had that sticks out, we've applied for a $30 million fund. Would that be the provincial government or the federal? Probably provincial.
Mm-hmm.
And why do we stick at 30 when the cost is so high?
Oh my goodness. So there's a maximum for allowable applications. So, and don't quote me because I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm happy to provide the criteria to the committee. They have very specific timelines. Like the project needs to be complete by like 2026, March of, so and we won't meet that timeline. And that was for the first intake. So this time around, obviously the timelines are longer, so we're hopeful that we can meet the criteria, but for the actual amount, I'm fairly certain that there is a maximum that you can apply for, and our project will just be more than the maximum. So, and I don't know if it's 30, but I can provide that to,
30 million's in the report.
but I can't remember if that's the maximum
Okay.
allowable amount, or if it was based on pricing through the ESR.
And would that be for phase one of the project or the whole project? Do you have any idea on that?
So, through the chair, they don't care what phase. They just see it as a project. So if we're saying that we're applying for, say, $30 million, that we know that that would cover phase 1 and 2, say, of the project, they're just looking at the project as a whole. So if we're doing all 3 phases, then we'd be applying for more money because it'd be a larger price tag. But whatever route we end up taking, they won't care if it's phase 1, 2, or 3. They just want to know what we're building and when it's going to be done and how big it is, essentially.
Right, because we were talking about doing it in different phases, which would take several years. And would that knock us out of the criteria because we couldn't get it done in their timeline?
Oh my goodness, through
And I apologize, yeah.
so through the chair, without getting too in the weeds on things that I don't have definitive answers on at the moment, phasing was identified through the ESR as a potential way to do parts of the project with the end goal being complete build out. Part of the design will be looking at whether that is the right way to go or not. So does that still make sense? Or is it we should do 2 phases, or is it that we should do 1 phase? I think we need to look at capacity and what we're looking at from a timing perspective and what makes the most sense for us. And that will be figured out through the design process.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody, questions from anybody else? Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just a question about design. I understand that you're working on the terms of reference right now, but does the municipality have the funds to cover the cost of design at this point if they are planning to move forward immediately through design?
Through the chair. So there is funding in the budget for design. Off the top of my head, I'm not going to remember what it is, but it has been budgeted through the process to do this part of the work. So yes, that being said, as we learned through the ESR, some of this costing was from quite a few years ago. We all know that things are very different now. So I think the terms of reference, as all do, will ask for updated pricing and projections for that. But to do that part of the work, technically, we have budgeted for that part. Whether depends on what we're designing, I guess.
Maybe just to follow up as well. Again, understand terms of reference still needs to be developed, but would there be any sense of timing to complete the design at this stage?
Through the chair, yes. So being the scale of the project as it is, we did, like I mentioned, enlist a third party to help with the design terms of reference, just because we wanted to make sure that everything is being thought of, like someone who hasn't been in it for so long, you kind of get a fresh perspective of the process. We're really hoping that this is out for bid within the next few months. And we're very hypersensitive to timing on capacity and making sure that everything continues to move along so that we don't run into any challenges in the future. But to say exactly when, we're just mindful to continue moving forward as quickly as we possibly can.
Charlie?
Okay, Mr. Chair, through you to Jessica, okay, is there anything the municipality can do to help expedite this process so that we are indeed ready to put the shovel in the ground? I think we're close, but, I guess looking at, the developments that, are on our plate, Loon Call already has, homes, people are occupying, I understand. There have been occupancy permits granted out at Loon Call. Certainly if you drive by that first fourplex, doesn't look like a contractor's vehicle in the driveway. It looks like a family car. They're almost completed a second unit. I understand from planning they may be bringing a building permit application for another section of homes out there. The people from Baybounds at least want to get undergrounds in yet this fall. I understand the development at down at the Legion property, something very binding is expected soon there. Now, I just, back to my first question, how soon are we to being prepared? If we can come up with the money, how soon can we? Could we be looking at construction if we have the financing next year?
So through the chair, I'm not going to comment on when I think we can be construction ready because I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. But what I will say is the design of a project of this caliber is not short. So like we're talking a year or two to design something like this. It's not something that's going to happen before the spring. So I think we're in a positive step to be heading into the design process, I think. But to think that that will be short, like it is a very complicated, important component is the design, and it is definitely not something that would be less than a couple years, if I'm being modest. So
Thanks for that. So now are we expecting Ainley's to play the lead role in this, or is it in their hands now as far as, or?
nope, through the chair, they are now complete. They brought us to the end of the ESR process. That's their contract with us. That was their commitment to us, and we're grateful for that. In order for them to be a competitor in bidding on the terms of reference, they are not involved in the development. So they can and will have the opportunity to bid just like anyone else. So we'll see what the future holds.
Just going down that line, so if it could take up to 2 years for design, then we really can apply to the government before then, correct?
Through the chair. So let me provide the criteria to you because I don't want to get saying anything that's incorrect, only because I don't remember the timelines off the top of my head. And my understanding based on the criteria was that we need to have entered into the design phase. I feel like there's some gray area there on what that means. But ultimately, the end dates that they have are what we need to be most concerned about, I think. Like, can we honestly believe that we would complete the project by the dates that they're requiring? I think that's the trickier part. But I don't think that it's unrealistic now that they've added time to the second intake, I think. But the first one we would have never made.
Okay, so in my mind, this project, there's so many different starts and finishes. One is, and there's a lot of people talk to me, do we even need this? Why don't we stop all new homes and stay with the way we are and use the facility we've got? There's that end to phase one of a certain amount, phase two, phase three, or a complete construction of a new facility. I'm sorry to put you on the hot seat. There's a lot of questions being fired at us, and I have a lot of questions. We're probably too early for you to answer some of them, but it's something that we have to decide as a municipality to whether we're going to go ahead with this or not, and how we're going to pay for it. Because I certainly hope that the present households of Meaford don't pay for it, that it's future development. So now we have to get a new crystal ball and find out exactly what development's going ahead. Right now, development across the province have come to a stall because of the cost. It's unbelievable how many, it was on the news today, a full half hour on different contractors putting a stop to everything because the cost has just gone out of the sky. So this is something that will come back to this committee and council many times in the next few months, especially through budget process and whatnot. So unless there's any other questions on it, I think it's really early in the stage.
Through you, yes, I agree. I think the one thing too, which can come back to this committee as well, to Harley's point, is there's a very big difference between committed capacity and new capacity. So when you're talking about, you know, the loon calls of the world and being allocated existing capacity means that they're able to live there because that's already been accounted for. It's the new folks, right? That's the, like you say, anything that's not on the books or isn't technically accounted for capacity wise, that's the challenging part. So I think sometimes we just need to remember that there are folks who don't have much to worry about because they've been committed into the capacity ledger, but it's the new development is the bigger concern.
Yeah, so like I said, we'll probably bring this back several times, but and please keep us updated if there's anything new on it, because this is one of the biggest things ever going to happen to this municipality.
Through the chair, I will, to close that loop, I will circulate the criteria that was shared with me from the province, just so that everyone understands kind of what they're looking for and how we would fit into the mix on funding.
Okay. So we will move to B. We need a mover and a seconder to. Yeah. So mover second, before we start into it or after? Probably first. Okay, can I get a mover and a seconder for the A? George? And Kevin? Thank you. So going into B, we need another mover and seconder to talk about development charges. Same ones, if that's okay, George and Kevin. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. So has anybody got any comments on development charges, the background study that we have in front of us? George?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I guess the question is, the development charges background study, was that completed after the EA had been completed for the wastewater treatment plant and the costs were known for that expansion as part of the DC background study?
Yeah, I had to really think about that. Through the chair, I think so too. Yeah, so the EA was complete and the ESR was open for 30, like it was, they were honestly kind of coming to a head at the same
Yeah.
time, if that makes sense. So yes, so costing would be based on the ESR costing. If that's helpful.
Anybody else? Yes, Kevin.
Excuse me.
Yeah, no.
Put your mic on. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Question, these charts that are set up, and we've taken the statistics from Statistic Canada on the estimated growth of this town with only 8% industry future. But we want to bring in a larger residential. What's going to bring in that larger residential? If we're not allowing the increase of more industrial?
What do you mean not allowing?
Well, the forecasting for this town, and it ties a lot into the water treatment plant too, and everything ties into that water treatment plant. Seems like the residents of Meaford are gonna pay a lot of money in their taxes coming forward in the next 3 to 5 years for this water treatment plant, if there's not gonna be more help outside of government, federal or provincial. That's just my concern, so.
And I don't have the answers, Kevin. And I'm hoping it doesn't cost the taxpayers any money that are the present taxpayers. It's the same with Thornbury. Town of Blue Mountains doesn't have any more industry than before, and look at what they're doing. Collingwood has very little industry, more than what they had. Look what's happening there. This is becoming a retirement village for the province. So everybody that moves up here is a taxpayer and pays taxes. Would you like to see all sorts of industry? We would love to see it, but who's going to come to this part of the area off the 401 corridor with the price of fuel and the price of everything? So it's tough to say. And the development charges, we're in the middle of that right now. The study, it's going out to the public. In order for it to be passed, it'll be shortly. And if you see in the development study, or inside the town of Meaford, it used to cost you 17,000 development charges. It's going to now cost you 45,000. And that is to help pay for the sewage treatment plant. The town of Blue Mountains, I believe, were around 45,000 and are going to 120,000 before you put a shovel in the ground. So instead of a $1.2 million house, it's going to be $1.3 million house for development charges to pay for their treatment plant, because Collingwood, the price of their plant is almost tripled. And I don't know why something's not being done. It's nothing but corporate greed as far as I'm concerned. And it's not dead set that we're going ahead with it. But this development charges is to help pay for that. And I'm hoping between provincial and federal help and development charges fees, that pays for it over the course of 50 years and not the present taxpayer, because the present taxpayer doesn't need this expansion as we speak. Not promising anything, but that's the way I'm looking at it. And I think that with my fellow councillors and staff, that's the way they're looking at it. And again, that's when we need a crystal ball. Say, yes, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. Because once you put the shovel in the ground and start that, you got to have somebody to pay for it. So it's very complicated. Yes, Harley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a comment or two. Our municipality is a bit late getting on this revision of development charges. I think it's expected every 5 years a municipality should re-examine its DCs, and if they need to be adjusted, so be it. The fifth year for us was about the middle of COVID, and of course, a lot of things that should have been done did get done during that time. Then we got extensions from the province that kind of carry on with what you've got, and that was fine. So it was about 7 or 8 years before we really got down to, I think everybody knows how the world has changed in the last 7 or 8 years, especially when it comes to material prices and contract prices, tenders. So it's to me quite possible that you know, had we done this maybe 3 years ago, maybe we would be looking at maybe going to $30,000 for DCs instead of 45. And then, of course, there's a little more added on thanks to the county because they have their own development charges. But I don't know how you get it. There's such a huge number of factors. I mean, we've got a federal government and a provincial government saying, hey, we've got to have more houses, we've got to have more accommodation. You know, everything seems to be working against, it's clashing. And of course, the municipalities end up caught in the middle. We're the front lines. No, as far as the Blue Mountains are concerned, I think they're just starting to realize that, hey, look, all this development for the last 3, 4, 5 decades, it's caught up to us, and we haven't caught up to it, they're suffering a bit right now, so I'm not sure. Like a municipality, other than gathering taxes, charging user fees, and development charges, we don't have a lot of options for raising revenue. And so as much as it hurts me, and I'm sure all of our council members to tell somebody, yeah, we want you to build, but it's going to cost you $50,000 to put up a new house before you even get started. We take no pleasure in that, but we don't have a lot of other options. If we don't make this bump in DC charges, and I'm not saying it's a done deal yet. As Steve says, it's going to come to council in September for a public meeting. And then I think maybe come back in October for a decision, but it has to be dealt with, and it's a difficult situation. But unfortunately, back up until 1990, the town of Meaford was a very industrialized town, and it had industrial taxes. Helping out with the tax funds, and then within about a 10 or 12 year period, just every company disappeared. And now, it's 30 years later, but we're suffering the consequences, and trying to do our very best to keep the ship afloat. Sorry. Don't mean to be overly pessimistic, but it's going to be tough.
Yeah, and on page 686 of 909 of today's agenda, it is a good chart, and so it shows that what we were charging for library on DC charges, for fire protection, tells you everything and what it's going to go to. And that is what we're relying on to advance the municipality is the present taxpayer is paid for what we got. The future taxpayer has to pay for anything else. No guarantees, but as long as I sit in that seat over there where George is, I don't expect the taxes are going to jump up in this municipality. Like I said in our first meeting, this municipality is 15 points ahead of the other ones in the county because we've added 2.5% every year whether we had a 0% increase or not, we've added that for infrastructure, 1% to roads, 1% to bridges, and 0.5% to our buildings. We've done that. Other municipalities haven't. That's why our taxes for this year come in at about a third of the rest of the municipalities in the county last year. And I expect it to happen again because they didn't cover their costs again. And it's going to be an interesting season and budget season, which is coming up very shortly. Any other comments on development charges? Okay, thank you. I'll move on to C, the capital budget. It's just a report. So there's no need to talk about getting a mover or seconder. Is that correct? Thank you. I asked to have the capital budget put on here. That's the one we're doing this year. And I'm sorry Jessica had to leave. She's probably getting other information for us. But if you look like 827, capital budget summary of what we're doing here, it's very aggressive. Like I said, we raised the taxes less. There was only two other municipalities beat us in the tax rate last year. But we're spending more than any other municipality on infrastructure. And I'm glad Jessica's not here because she'll tell me it's never enough. But I know for a fact right now our bridge levy, we've got 1.7 million in it this year. That's already in our tax base. That's there every year. And as we add to it, it gets bigger. Facilities is the same thing, and roads. It's already in there, most of it. So I think the road levy's 1.5 million is already in the tax base that we can spend on roads every year without touching the rest of the tax base. So I just put it in there, and I was going to ask Jessica how we're doing on the carry forward projects. I'm going to have her put a report together. She was on holidays. I couldn't get her to do it. A report together on how we're doing on the carry forward projects, because that's a big chunk. That was $3 million worth. I know the Bay Shore rehabilitation is done, whatnot. Is there any questions on the capital budget? Yes, George.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I was reviewing some of the projects on the list there, and I noticed a number of them are related to removal of inflow and infiltration in the existing sanitary sewers. There was projects to fix I&I issues downtown, to address some of the results of the smoke testing that had been done previously. So just curious on the timing, and maybe Jessica can speak to it when she gets back here, but also how the municipality plans to measure capacity that's created through those projects at the treatment plant.
Yeah. The question that he asked was, how are we doing with the I&I? I know we're spending a lot of money on it. Are we gaining any ground?
Through the chair, I will answer that question in a second. I think it's appropriate that I tell everyone why I keep leaving. So, I was informed in a phone call that there is an OPP situation in town. So we're in a hold and secure situation at the moment, which includes the school. I don't know how much information I can share, but we're locking our facilities and making sure that everyone is safe in town, and the OPP is doing what they need to do. But I didn't want to just keep leaving and not explain what that was all about. So I apologize.
Oh, that's important. You've locked these doors?
I think we're outside of where it's
Okay.
concerning, but I did tell staff here that, and we have communicated to staff who work outside that they should go to a safer place and not be in certain locations. So anyway, full transparency on the current situation. When and if that changes, I will let you know. But I would suggest you don't go downtown when you leave here as of right now. I, so through the chair, we have made, I think some I solutions have been fruitful. And I think we are currently struggling with cost benefit analysis of other options within I. I think some of the tactics that we've taken on the last couple of years, like lining, like sewer lining, we have seen at the plant. I think it's made a difference for sure. Like the operators would tell you that they see a noticeable difference in rain events. So I think, yes, I do think some of it has been fruitful. I mean, it's beneficial that way, but it also, where our infrastructure is lasting longer before we need to invest in complete replacement, right? So I think there's a lot of winning in some of those scenarios. We're currently looking at some of the more difficult I solutions, if you will. And as we've talked about earlier today, the costs of things are not what they were when our I strategy was completed 5 or 6 years ago, I guess now at this point. So we're currently trying to understand if the cost outweighs the benefit, considering the fact that we are venturing to an upgrade at the plant. So I'd say, yes, some of the I has been great. And I think we're currently trying to figure out what the next steps with I might look like and how to invest that money in the way to make the most difference. Is that a fair answer?
Any other questions on the capital budget? Moving forward? Yes, Harley.
Thanks again, Mr. Chair, through you to Jessica, the Nelson Street parking lot. We were hoping to install a couple of charging stations there before. I think that was the first step before we got into finishing off the lot. Now, the charging stations, I think we had a grant involved there. I think the county was involved too. I'm just wondering, it's September now, do we still expect, we're at least gonna get the charging stations put in this year? I know there's hydro involved and it's not just a matter of digging a hole and sticking these things in. So can you give us an update on where that might be at?
Through the chair, I truthfully am not sure where that's at. I can find out more information on that particular project and relay it back to the committee. There's also a plan on having a capital project update report to council, I would say in the next month or two at the most. There's a lot still happening. Like there's a lot of projects that are still ongoing. There's some that are just starting. So our intention is to be transparent about where we're at midway through the fall, just so that everyone's on the same page with what will be completed, what will have to happen next year, or all of the good things that come with that. So I will find out about the charging stations and circulate the information, because off the top of my head, I truthfully don't know, but look forward to that report, which will outline all of them within the next month or so.
Thank you. That's a report I was going to ask for, is especially the carry forward capital projects from last year, how we were doing on it. Now I'll wait to receive your report on that. Thank you. Is there anything, committee inquiries? Any inquiries you would like to bring forward? Maybe if we have something for next meeting, is there anything you just want to talk about? or you want to leave it up to, Kevin and I put this together. Maybe I'll invite George next time or whatever, but, if you want to see something on, please email me. And I will talk to staff and see if they can put that on the agenda for the next meeting. And I look forward to, like I said, the capital project, how we're making out with that. Which would see how much money we have to put aside for next year. Having seen no inquiries, to number 9, communications. The committee will consider correspondence received by members of the public during each meeting. To share your comments, thoughts, or concerns with members of the committee, the public can send an email to deputyclerk@meaford.ca. When emails are received to this email address, they will be compiled into a correspondence list, which is then distributed to committee members prior to the meeting. The cover sheet to this list will be included on each meeting agenda. The contents of the correspondence list are not included on the public agenda to protect the privacy and personal information of those residents who choose to send in their thoughts and comments. Having said that, the date of our next meeting will be November 6th, 2024, right in the center of deer season. Having said that, I will call for adjournment. Do we need a mover or seconder for adjournment, or just, I'm going to adjourn? Thank you.